So if you picture the modern political battlefield for a second, what comes to mind?
It's loud.
Right. It is incredibly loud. It's performative.
Very performative. Attention is really the currency of the realm right now.
Exactly. It's all about who can get the most engagement on X or, who can deliver the sickest burn on a primetime cable news hit.
Yeah, the conventional wisdom today says that if you aren't making noise, you aren't making policy.
Which brings us to today's deep dive. Because we are looking at a stack of sources that tell a completely different story.
A very different story.
We're digging into the career of what you might call a workhorse. And I don't mean that as just a cliche.
Right.
We have this fascinating case study in front of us. A guy who has seemingly cracked the code on how to be a detail-obsessed policy nerd.
Like technocrat, really.
Yeah, a technocrat conservative in an era of high-octane populism. And somehow, he is winning his elections by these massive, almost North Korean margins in a deep red state.
It is a statistical anomaly when you look at the data. I mean, in a time where being labeled a moderate or an institutionalist usually means you're about to lose your primary.
You're dead in the water.
Exactly. But this figure totally stands out.
So we were talking about Dusty Johnson. For you listening, he is the U.S. representative for South Dakota's at-large congressional district.
The whole state.
The whole state, yeah. And the big news, the reason we are doing this deep dive right now is that as of June 30th, 2025, so last year, he officially announced his run for governor of South Dakota for the 2026 election.
Right. And our mission today isn't just to talk about a guy running for governor.
No, definitely not.
If you look at the voting records and the biographical data and just the sheer length of the resume we've been reviewing, Johnson represents a real test case.
He really does.
He is testing whether a politician who cares more about, say, the price of ethanol transport than the latest culture war outrage, whether that guy can actually inherit the Mad-GA coalition without actually being Mad-GA.
And that's the tension right there. Because when we tear into his voting record later in the show, and we have the actual roll call votes here, he has done things that, by all conventional metrics, should have ended his career.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, he voted for the January 6th commission.
Yep.
He voted against President Trump's border emergency declaration.
In almost any other district, that is an automatic primary loss. It's game over.
Right. Just ask Liz Cheney.
Or Peter Meijer. Or Tom Murray.
Exactly. The political graveyard is full of Republicans who took those exact same votes. It is a kill zone.
But Dusty Johnson didn't just survive those votes. He actually thrived.
So that is the central question for you today. How?
Yeah.
How do you walk through the fire of the post-2020 Republican Party, vote against the leader of your party on these major institutional issues, and then come out the other side with an endorsement from that very same leader?
It requires a very specific toolkit. And to understand it, you really can't just look at his time in Washington.
No, you have to go back.
You have to go back to 1998, to a kid in Pierre, South Dakota who wasn't dreaming of being a TV star. He was dreaming of being a bureaucrat.
So let's open the dossier. Segment 1, the Wunderkind.
Let's get into it.
So Johnson is born in Pierre in 1976. And right off the bat, the local product branding is very strong here.
Very strong.
He graduates from T.F. Riggs High School in 1995.
And that matters a lot in a state like South Dakota. Because Pierre is the capital, but it's also a small town.
Right, it's not a massive metropolis.
No, so being from Pierre means you intimately understand the specific rhythm of the state government. It's the factory town industry of your hometown.
That makes total sense. The government is the local business. And clearly he was the kid in class who actually did the reading.
Unquestionably.
We're looking at his time at the University of South Dakota, political science degree in 1999. He's in the Phi Delta Theta fraternity. He gets Omicron Delta Kappa honors.
But there is one specific accolade in this early biography that really signals who he's going to become.
The Truman Scholarship.
Yes. In 1998, he was named a Truman Scholar. And we should pause there because Truman Scholar is one of those terms that gets thrown around in political bios, but the implications of it are profound for understanding his psychology.
Yeah, break that down for us. What does being a Truman Scholar actually tell us about a college student? Because it's not just making the dean's list.
Not at all. The Harry S. Truman Scholarship isn't just an academic award for getting straight A's. It is a highly competitive, federally funded scholarship granted specifically to U.S. college juniors who demonstrate leadership potential and a firm commitment to public service.
So it's a very specific track.
It is essentially a recruiting tool for the future leaders of the government bureaucracy.
So this isn't for the person who wants to go to Wall Street and make $1 billion.
No. If you see Truman Scholar on a resume, it usually means this person is a serious policy wonk who intends to spend their entire life inside the machinery of government.
It signals a belief that government can actually work.
Exactly. It shows a belief that government can work if you just have the right smart people pulling the levers.
Which is such an interesting contrast to the modern populist vibe of, burn the whole system down.
Completely. He starts his career with a credential that essentially says, I believe in the system. And the sources show he did exactly that. As a Truman Scholar, he went out to D.C. to work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Getting that federal experience early.
Right. And then he gets his Master of Public Administration from the University of Kansas. He is literally stacking up these credentials that scream competent administrator.
And he puts those administrative credentials to use almost immediately. In 2003, he works as a senior policy advisor for then-Governor Mike Rounds.
But the real leap, the moment he stops being just a staffer and becomes an actual player, is in 2004.
The Public Utilities Commission.
The DUC.
Now I know what you listening are probably thinking. You were promised a fascinating political deep dive, and now we are talking about utility rates.
I know it sounds like the absolute driest, most sedate job in all of government.
But stick with us here, because the sources suggest this was actually a political masterstroke. This is really where the Dusty Johnson brand is born.
Absolutely.
He gets elected to the PUC in 2004.
And we have to highlight the key stat here. He was the youngest utilities commissioner in the entire nation at that time.
The youngest in the nation. That is such a bold move. You're in your late 20s, and you are regulating electricity and telephone rates.
Right.
Why would a 28-year-old political upstart want to be a utilities commissioner? Why not run for the state legislature where you can give big speeches?
You really have to look at the power dynamics of a rural state like South Dakota to understand it.
Okay.
In a major city, you might not think about your utility regulator unless the power goes out. But in South Dakota, this is an agricultural economy.
Right. Farming is everything.
Exactly. So who regulates the rates for grain drying? The PUC. Who regulates the cost of electricity to pump water for heavy irrigation? The PUC.
So by taking this boring job, he is actually inserting himself directly into the balance sheet of every single farm in the state.
Precisely. Who is responsible for whether or not a farmer can get broadband internet to run their modern precision agriculture equipment? It's the PUC.
Wow.
So Dusty Johnson wasn't out there debating flag burning or school prayer. He was debating how much it costs to run a family farm.
That is a crucial distinction. It's kitchen table politics, but even more specific than that, it's barn politics.
Barn politics, I like that. And he excelled at it. He became the chairman of the PUC by 2007. And he wasn't just sitting there keeping the lights on. He was highly active.
Right, I saw that in the notes.
In 2010, he leads this delegation to meet with the FCC commissioners regarding the National Broadband Plan.
He's down in D.C. arguing with federal regulators about the definition of broadband for rural providers.
Which, again, sounds highly technical. But if you are living in a town of 400 people and Netflix is buffering constantly...
Or, more importantly, you can't upload your crop yield data to the futures market.
Exactly. The guy who is fighting to fix that infrastructure is a hero to you. And he did it without ever having to take a stance on a polarizing social issue. This is the absolute foundation of his problem solver brand.
It's almost a shelter from the political storm. You can't really get primaried from the right on electricity rates in the same way you can on immigration or taxes.
Precisely. It insulated him completely. The lights either turn on or they don't. The internet works or it doesn't. It is a binary metric of success that everyone agrees on.
And that transition from youngest commissioner to a serious policy heavyweight sets him up perfectly for his next role. Because in 2011, he resigns from the PUC.
But he doesn't quit public service.
No, he goes deeper inside. Which brings us to segment 2, the operator.
In 2011, Governor Dennis Daugaard takes office, and he taps Dusty Johnson to be his chief of staff.
Now, chief of staff is a title that can mean a lot of different things depending on the specific administration.
Right.
Sometimes it's just a glorified scheduler. Sometimes it's a political hatchet man who just handles the dirty work.
But the description of his role during the Daugaard administration in our sources is really telling. The material refers to him as the, quote, chief operating officer for much of state government.
The COO.
Exactly. A COO model implies he was actually running the machinery day to day. He was supervising cabinet secretaries, overseeing policy advisors, and managing the governor's core initiatives.
So he's not just the guy guarding the door to the Oval Office, so to speak. He's the guy making sure the gears are actually turning.
Think about the level of detail that requires. You have to know the budget constraints of the Department of Transportation. You have to know the personnel issues in the Department of Social Services.
You have to know how to negotiate with the legislature to get the governor's agenda passed.
Right. So if you are a voter in South Dakota looking at him right now in 2026 for governor, you are looking at a guy who has technically already run the government.
That is the argument he is undoubtedly making on the campaign trail. He has seen the job from the inside. He knows where the bodies are buried, or at least where the files are stored.
And he did that operational work for 4 solid years until 2014.
And then comes the pivot.
Yeah.
He leaves the Daugaard administration, and his successor there is Tony Van Hoosen, by the way. But Johnson doesn't go straight to running for office himself yet.
No, he goes into the private sector.
He joins Vantage Point Solutions in Mitchell, South Dakota as vice president.
Which, again, fits the broader narrative perfectly.
Tell us about Vantage Point Solutions, because this isn't just a situation where he goes to a white shoe law firm to cash out.
No, not at all. Vantage Point Solutions is an engineering and consulting firm heavily involved in broadband and telecommunications.
Interesting.
So think about the thread here. He regulates broadband at the PUC. He oversees the state's infrastructure as chief of staff, and now he goes directly to the private sector to actually help build out that rural infrastructure.
It really does feel like he was systematically checking boxes on a perfect candidate bingo card.
It does.
Public service, check. Executive management, check. Private sector business experience, check.
It completely rounds out the resume. It insulates him from the standard criticism that he's a career politician who has never signed the front of a paycheck.
Even his career up to that point had been overwhelmingly public-facing.
Right, but it gives him that businessman credential that conservative voters value so highly.
So by 2018, he is completely ready. The seat opens up. Kristi Noem, who was the U.S. representative at the time, decides to run for governor.
A path Dusty is now replicating almost step for step, by the way.
Exactly. And Dusty throws his hat in the ring for Congress. Which brings us to segment 3, the congressman.
The 2018 election was his real introduction to the national stage, but it was also a major test of his local strength. He had a competitive primary.
He had to beat Chantel Krebs, who was the Secretary of State, and Neil Tapio, a state senator.
And he won that primary with nearly 47% of the vote in a 3-way race.
Which is very strong. And then he cruises through the general election against the Democrat Tim Yorkman with over 60%.
Once he gets to Washington in 2019, he does not waste any time defining his political identity. And this is crucial for you to understand his trajectory.
Right.
He didn't join the Freedom Caucus. He didn't join the bomb throwers or the cable news regulars.
He joined the Problem Solvers Caucus.
Yes. Immediately upon arrival.
For anyone listening who might hear that name and think it's just a generic campaign slogan, what does the Problem Solvers Caucus actually signify in D.C.?
The Problem Solvers Caucus is a formal bipartisan group. It's composed of roughly equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans committed to finding common ground on legislation.
So it's a structured voting bloc.
Exactly. By joining it, and by also becoming the chair of the Republican Main Street Partnership, Johnson was planting a very specific flag.
What was the message?
He was saying, I am a pragmatist. I am here to govern, not to agitate.
It's the brand of the adult in the room.
Precisely. And often, in media shorthand, that brand is viewed as moderate or centrist.
And in today's GOP, moderate can sometimes be a very dirty word. It can get you labeled a rhino, Republican in name only.
But here's the fascinating thing about Dusty Johnson. His voting record isn't necessarily liberal at all. It's just procedural. And despite that moderate branding look at his electoral dominance.
The numbers we have here are wild. Let's look at 2020. He has a primary challenger, Liz May. He beats her 77% to 23%.
A blowout.
And then in the general election, he gets 81% of the vote. 81%.
That is a staggering number. You just don't see that in contested federal elections.
And then 2022 comes along. Now, this is post-January 6th. The political climate has shifted dramatically.
Very much so.
He gets a primary challenge from his right, Taffy Howard, and she is coming at him specifically on his voting record, which we will get to in a minute. This really should have been his vulnerable moment.
Then it was closer, relatively speaking, but he still won 59% to 40%.
In a primary, a nearly 20-point win is still highly decisive.
It's a mandate. And then he turns around in 2024 and wins the general with 72%.
So he is essentially bulletproof electorally. But why? Because when we look at segment 4, The tightrope walk. His voting record is not what you would expect from someone with that level of support in a deep red state.
No, it certainly isn't. And this is where we really have to give you the nuance of the situation.
Right.
Dusty Johnson has established a record of what I would call independent institutionalism. He has taken votes that directly defied President Trump and the Mad J movement, specifically on issues of executive power and the democratic process.
We have to talk about the elephant in the room.
Well,
Or rather, the elephant that trampled the room, the Trump years.
this is where the case study of Dusty Johnson gets incredibly complicated.
Because up until 2019, you could argue he's just a standard Chamber of Commerce conservative. But then he gets to Congress, and almost immediately he starts taking votes that seem designed to antagonize the leader of his party.
Let's look at the timeline from the sources. March 2019, he has been in Congress for maybe 8 weeks. He is fresh off the boat.
Brand new.
President Trump declares a national emergency to fund the border wall because Congress wouldn't appropriate the cash he wanted.
Now, to be clear here, Johnson supports the wall. The sources note he has an A rating from strict immigration groups. He's not a fan of open borders.
Correct. He absolutely wants the wall built, but he votes with the Democrats to override President Trump's veto of the measure that would have revoked that emergency declaration.
Whoa. So he voted to stop Trump from using emergency powers to build the wall. Why? If you want the wall, why vote to stop the guy building it?
Because Johnson is an institutionalist first. The source material highlights his core argument here. The Constitution says Congress holds the purse strings, Article 1.
The power of the purse.
Exactly. If the president can just declare an emergency to spend money that Congress specifically did not approve, the executive branch essentially becomes a king.
Right.
Johnson was arguing essentially, I want the wall, but I don't want a king.
That is a very nuanced law school classroom type of argument.
It is. It is a process over outcome argument, which is rare today.
And usually those nuanced process arguments get you absolutely shredded in a Republican primary. They get you labeled a rhino immediately. Your opponents just say, oh, he cares more about process than securing the border.
And he was one of only 14 Republicans to take that vote. That is a very lonely island to be on. He stayed against the vast majority of his own conference.
So how did he survive that?
I think it comes down to his communication style back home.
What did he do?
He didn't go on a liberal cable network and say Trump is a danger to democracy. He went back to South Dakota and held town halls and said, look, folks, if we let a Republican president do this today, a Democratic president is going to do it tomorrow for gun control or climate change. We have to protect the checkbook.
Ah, he made it about the future threat of Democrats. That is incredibly smart politics.
It is highly disciplined. He framed it as a conservative defense of the Constitution, not a personal attack on Trump.
But then the difficulty ramped up significantly. The 2020 election aftermath.
The ultimate litmus test for the modern GOP.
The certification. When the lawsuit, Texas versus Pennsylvania, was filed at the Supreme Court to contest the election results, a majority of Republican members of Congress signed an amicus brief supporting it.
They formally put their names on the document saying, throw out these votes.
But Dusty Johnson did not.
He sat it out. He did not sign the brief.
And then on January 6th, when it came time to certify the Electoral College votes, he voted to certify the results in both Arizona and Pennsylvania. He formally accepted the election outcome.
And that alone was enough to end careers for some Republicans. Just acknowledging Biden won was considered a massive betrayal in some circles.
But he went even further. May 2021, the January 6th Commission.
This is perhaps his most striking vote. There was a bill to establish an independent bipartisan commission to investigate the storming of the Capitol.
And just to be clear, this is not the select committee that Nancy Pelosi eventually set up. This was the original bipartisan proposal.
Right. And most of the GOP leadership had turned against it by the time the vote actually happened. Kevin McCarthy was actively whipping against it.
But Dusty Johnson was one of only 35 Republicans who joined all the Democrats to vote yes.
He voted for the commission. He wanted the investigation.
I stopped cold when I saw this in the data. Why would he take that risk?
He argued that the country needed to know the truth. He called it a dark day and said we shouldn't just sweep it under the rug.
And he also voted to keep Liz Cheney in leadership.
He did. During the second vote to oust her as Republican conference chair, he voted to keep her in her post.
Okay, so let's stack this all up. He denied Trump his emergency wall funding. He validated the 2020 election results. He voted to investigate the Capitol riot. And he supported the woman who became Trump's arch nemesis, Liz Cheney.
By all conventional political physics, Dusty Johnson should be a former congressman right now. He should be working at a think tank or a lobbying firm.
But then we look at the timeline again, June 2020, Donald Trump formally endorses him.
Yeah.
He calls him, quote, a phenomenal advocate for the people of South Dakota. How does that happen? How do you vote against the leader of the party on the most sensitive loyalty issues and still get the phenomenal advocate stamp of approval?
I think it comes down to how Johnson frames these votes and perhaps more importantly, his sheer utility to the party.
Utility in what way?
Johnson doesn't make it personal. He never attacked Trump's character in the press. He attacked the procedure. And simultaneous to that, he is working incredibly hard on the things that actually matter to South Dakota voters and to the administration's policy goals.
Like agriculture, infrastructure, trade.
Essentially, yes. When Trump needed a vote on the USMCA trade deal, Johnson was there whipping for it. When the administration needed help drafting complicated ag policy, Johnson was the expert they called.
So in politics, utility often trumps purity.
It really does. He was
Yeah.
simply too useful to purge.
That is a fascinating insight. He made himself completely indispensable on the boring stuff so he could afford to have a conscience on the constitutional stuff.
That is a perfect way to put it. And that brings us perfectly to segment 5. Policy nuance. Because if you only look at those specific Trump votes, you might think, oh, he's just a secret Democrat.
Right.
But when you look at his actual policy work from the sources, that theory falls apart completely.
He's not a liberal. Let's look at the Respect for Marriage Act in 2022. This was the bill to codify same-sex marriage into federal law.
And Johnson voted against it.
He voted no, along with South Dakota Senators Thune and Rounds.
This is a key data point for you to consider. If he were a squish or a liberal in disguise, this would be the exact vote to flip on. It was a popular bill nationally.
But his rationale was very specific and very conservative. What was the argument he made?
He argued that the bill didn't provide sufficient protections for religious beliefs. He explicitly stated if Congress is going to codify the Supreme Court's gay marriage decision, the religious protections need to be airtight, and they weren't.
He also made a federalism argument, right?
Yeah.
He basically said this isn't Congress's business to begin with.
Exactly. During his 2022 campaign, he argued that marriage is fundamentally the business of the states.
He pointed to the full faith and credit provision of the Constitution.
Right, arguing that states already have to recognize legal acts from other states, so federal law simply wasn't necessary. He dismissed it as a political show bill orchestrated by Nancy Pelosi.
So on social issues, he sticks to a pretty traditional conservative line: religious liberty and states' rights. He is not crossing the aisle on culture war issues in the same way he does on institutional ones.
Correct. He is highly reliable where the base expects him to be reliable on core social values.
But then look at his economic policy.
Yeah.
This is where the Problem Solvers Caucus side really comes out.
Yes, the antitrust legislation.
In 2022, he voted for the Merger Filing Fee Modernization Act. That is a mouthful. What does it actually do?
It's essentially an antitrust package. It was designed to crack down on massive corporations for anti-competitive behavior.
Wait, a Republican voting to crack down on corporations? That sounds pretty unusual.
It used to be highly unusual, but the party is shifting on economics. And he was one of only 39 Republicans to vote for it.
So he's willing to go after big business when he thinks they're monopolistic.
Which perfectly fits the Main Street branding. He's pro-business, but he's pro-competition. It's a nuanced position that separates him from the old-school laissez-faire corporate Republicans.
He is acknowledging that sometimes big companies get too big and actually hurt the little guy, the farmer, the small business owner in Pierre.
It's a prairie populism almost.
Prairie populism, I love that. And we can't ignore his committee assignments. They tell the whole story of his priorities in D.C.
Agriculture is the obvious one. Subcommittees on nutrition oversight, commodity exchanges.
Crucial for South Dakota.
Absolutely. And transportation and infrastructure. Aviation, highways, railroads. That directly matches his old PUC background.
And the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party.
That's a massive one.
Tell us about that committee, because it sounds intense.
That is a very high-profile, highly strategic assignment. It was set up to investigate the economic and security threat posed by the CCP.
So it's not a joke assignment.
Not at all. Being put on that committee shows that House leadership fundamentally trusts him with sensitive, high-level geopolitical work. It's a serious committee for serious members. It is not a place for showboating.
And then on the lighter side, we absolutely have to mention the Congressional Motorcycle Caucus.
Oh, yes, you have to have the Motorcycle Caucus.
Does he actually ride?
The source material notes he's a member. And it certainly helps the image. You know, the policy nerd with the glasses who can also hop on a Harley on the weekends.
It adds a layer of relatability that shouldn't be underestimated in a rural state like South Dakota.
It really humanizes him. It says, I might read 400-page legislative bills for fun, but I also enjoy the open road.
So that brings us to the present, or rather the near past. Segment 6, the future.
The culmination of everything we've analyzed today.
June 30th, 2025. Dusty Johnson officially announces he is running for governor of South Dakota for the 2026 election.
It really feels like the closing of a loop, doesn't it?
It does. He started as the COO of the state under Daugaard. He went to Washington, built a massive legislative network, survived the wildest parts of the Trump years, kept his approval ratings sky high.
And now he wants to come home and actually run the show as the executive.
And if you look at the trajectory, it makes perfect logical sense. He's effectively applying for a promotion to a job he arguably already did as chief of staff 10 years ago.
But now he's coming back with federal experience, a national profile, and a massive war chest.
And let's be honest, he's also offering a pretty stark contrast to the current administration in South Dakota.
Yeah.
Kristi Noem has been a very high-profile national media figure. Dusty Johnson seems to be offering a return to boredom.
I think competence is the word his campaign would prefer to use.
Fair enough. If we had to speculate, based strictly on the data and the history we've reviewed today, what kind of governor would he actually be?
Based on the PUC era and his time as chief of staff?
Exactly.
The source material points to a governor who would be extremely detail-oriented. He is not going to be a governor who just signs bills for the photo op and cuts ribbons.
He's going to be in the weeds.
Very much in the weeds. He's going to be looking at the operational efficiency of state agencies. He's going to be obsessed with broadband maps and rural utility rates.
A manager-in-chief?
Yes, a true technocrat executive. And politically, I think we can expect him to be quite independent-minded.
He's proven that already.
He has proven he isn't afraid to buck the national party trends if he genuinely thinks it's right for South Dakota or right for his reading of the Constitution.
But as we saw with the marriage vote, he will likely remain staunchly conservative on social issues and religious liberty.
It's a very powerful combination. Competence plus conservatism plus independence.
It's a formidable platform in a state like South Dakota.
Yeah.
And frankly, it's a platform that is very hard for an opponent to attack.
Yeah.
How do you run negative ads attacking a guy for being too competent?
Or for reading the bills too closely. You really can't.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Let's wrap this up. We started by calling him a pragmatic maverick.
And I think that title holds up entirely after going through the evidence.
Dusty Johnson is a study in contrasts.
He's a Phi Delta Theta fraternity member who became a Truman Scholar.
He's a guy who rides with the motorcycle caucus, but nerds out on antitrust filing fees.
He's a Republican who survived the Trump era while voting for the January 6th commission, but then votes against federal marriage codification on strict Federalist grounds.
It's a highly complex picture. And maybe that is exactly the point. We get so used to politicians being flat, two-dimensional caricature.
Cable news talking points.
Right. But Dusty Johnson feels three-dimensional.
He does.
Yeah.
And as he moves toward the governorship in 2026, it raises a really provocative question for the rest of the country.
What's the question?
In an era of performative politics where it often feels like the loudest, most outrageous voice always wins, Johnson is betting his entire career on boring competence and specific nuanced constitutional stances.
He is betting that voters actually do want nuance.
Exactly. He's betting that the exhausted majority we always hear about is real and actually votes.
So does his success prove that voters are genuinely hungry for this kind of leadership? Or is Dusty Johnson's specific brand of popularity just a unique quirk of South Dakota politics that simply can't be replicated anywhere else?
That is the big question to mull over as 2026 approaches.
It really is. If you want to dive deeper into this specific brand of politics, I'd encourage you to look up the Problem Solvers Caucus roll calls and see who else is trying to make that institutionalist brand work in today's climate.
It's a fascinating group to watch.
Absolutely. Well, that is the story of Dusty Johnson. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.